Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cities of Service webinar, Finding Your Messengers, Lessons on Census Field Recruitment from San Jose and Community Connect Labs. Before we go over the presenter and agenda information, I'm going to highlight a couple technical details specific to the webinar platform. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop. To the left is the GoToWebinar viewer, through which you will see the presentation. And to the right is the GoToWebinar control panel, where you can ask questions and select your audio mode. You're listening through your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join by phone, just select telephone in the audio panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you don't see the questions panel, please click on the orange arrow to reveal the whole control panel. Also, this webinar will be recorded and emailed to you. So now let's get to know the presenters for today's webinar. My name is Rosalind Irwin, and I am Senior Program Manager at Cities of Service. I also lead our bi-monthly Census Working Group calls. And I'm really excited to introduce our two speakers. Thoo coordinates meetings of the Enumerator Recruitment Subcommittee of Santa Clara County's Complete Census Count Committee. Lawrence is also Special Projects Manager at Work to Future, the local workforce development board administered by the City of San Jose's Office of Economic Development. There, he supports strategies and initiatives aimed at helping job seekers, especially job seekers with barriers to employment, successfully meet the workforce needs of the region's employers. And Stephanie Kim is Director of Government and Nonprofit Programs for Community Connect Labs, a nonprofit that provides mobile messaging solutions to governments and nonprofits. Stephanie leads partnerships and implementation of CCL's Field Staff Recruiter tool through work with City of San Jose and with the U.S. Census Bureau's 2019 Accelerator Program. A warm welcome to our presenters, and thank you again for making time to share your experience with us. And now I'd like to go over the webinar agenda. Because we have a number of new participants on the line who are new to Cities of Service, I'm going to start off with a quick overview of the organization and our citizen engagement model. Next, we'll transition to the 2020 census. What's at stake and what does it all mean? Then, we'll highlight some citizen engagement opportunities that cities can use to help drive a more complete count, including field staff recruitment. Then, we'll turn it over to Lawrence and Stephanie to explain the process that led them to the field staff recruitment pilot in San Jose. And finally, we'll dive into your questions. Please remember to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We'll use the questions you submit to curate a Q&A portion at the end. And without further ado, let's get started. You can see the mission of Cities of Service up here on the screen. Cities of Service was first launched by Mayor Michael Bloomberg in 2009. We were created to provide a new mechanism for citizen participation in local governance. And we grew from an initial group of 16 founding mayors into a coalition of more than 260 cities. It's important to note that the word citizen carries a lot more weight when we're talking about the 2020 census. On the screen, you'll see our definition of citizen that we use at Cities of Service. The work of Cities of Service is grounded in our citizen engagement model, which you can see on the screen. It consists of 5 key elements, which we have distilled from lessons we've learned about citizen engagement over the years. The first 2 elements are leadership and identifying a challenge. We start with the belief that elected city leaders have the perspective needed to identify the challenges that are of top priority for the city. For example, Mayor Liccardo in San Jose has been vocal about his dedication to achieving a complete census count, and he's made concrete investments in census preparation efforts. Next is deliberation with the community. Before a city takes on a task, implements a solution, or creates a policy, Cities of Service encourages cities to deliberate with its citizens. We believe that it's important for cities to confirm that what they think is a problem is indeed a problem, and to see if the solutions they are proposing actually make sense for the community of focus. Next, it's time to get to work. After deliberating with the community, city leaders and citizens come together to take action. This is about working together side by side with the citizens. And there are opportunities for both deliberation and collaboration in the city's preparation process. And lastly, it's important to show impact. We believe that measuring impact helps cities point to concrete results and tell the world how the partnership between the city and citizen has made a powerful difference. In addition to measuring goals against goals along the way, helps cities notice when things are going off the rails and adjust before the work is complete. For the census, we hope that the impact is the most complete census count possible for your city. That tangible impact and the citizen engagement process to get there is a starting point for more engagement down the road. And you can learn a lot more about our work with cities beyond the census on our website. So before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to examine why we even care about the census and why the 2020 census might be particularly challenging. The United States Census aims to count every resident in the United States. This count serves as the basis for congressional representation in each state, and it determines the allocation of about $800 billion in federal funding for local programs related to housing, education, and infrastructure, among many others. But there are always barriers to being counted. Some of the most common barriers are related to language, mistrust in government, misinformation, and non-traditional living arrangements. This year, the digital divide, or the difference in internet access and computer literacy, could also be a barrier. And that's because the 2020 census is the first time people are being encouraged to respond to the census via an online portal. Only 20% of households will receive a paper questionnaire in the first census mailing. Everyone else will receive a mailing with a unique ID and instructions to complete the census online. To support the complete count, cities can get community members involved at all levels and all phases of census preparation. More than anything, you want people to feel connected to the city and to know the importance of the census so they can serve as reliable and trusted census ambassadors in their communities. The more community members are engaged in the process, the more likely they will be to advocate among their families and communities to participate in the count. Here are some ways that cities can engage the community in census preparation. Involve community members in your complete count committee. Most cities, counties, and states are forming complete count committees and subcommittees of stakeholders to support and advise on all aspects of census preparation. Your city can encourage participation from local leaders to get advice on how to reach people in their specific communities. Recruit volunteers for census outreach efforts. The city of San Jose actually mobilized volunteers last winter for an address canvassing effort to make sure they had an up-to-date list of census addresses for the census. Other cities are using volunteers for ongoing outreach efforts. Leverage your existing community networks and bring them in as partners early. For example, Detroit is building on strong historical relationships with neighborhood groups to recruit local census captains to serve as eyes and ears in communities. Because of the established trust and early call to action, these census captains will also be quickly activated for targeted outreach in real-time response to census returns when the count begins in the spring. A complete count benefits all communities. But the census has an even more direct and immediate economic benefit to communities by being a source of well-paying temporary job opportunities. Helping community members secure these positions is just another way a city can engage its community members to achieve a complete count. The Census Bureau needs to hire, train, and deploy hundreds of thousands of field staff to assist the census process across the country. And nearly 500,000 of those people will be the census takers or enumerators, the people who knock on doors of households who have not returned their census forms. Other positions are address canvassers, those that verify addresses in the Census Bureau's master address file in advance of the census, and also supervisory positions. Helping to get local community members in these positions, in turn, benefits the city by putting more familiar faces with understanding of local communities in these important positions. Cities are building a pipeline of local candidates by making the opportunity visible at job fairs and through marketing, by partnering with community colleges and other key partners, and offering assistance to job applicants in workforce development offices. The City of San Jose recognized this unique opportunity to engage community members to support complete count efforts. But in addition to investing in the low-tech outreach efforts and convening their partners, they decided to unite the great work of their partners through a text messaging tool that will support job applicants through the process. They are piloting this process now with address canvasser recruitment before the enumerator recruitment process begins. So now I'm going to pass it off to our speakers for today's webinar. And to kick off the story, Lawrence will first explain the conditions in San Jose and Santa Clara County and the process that the City of San Jose and its partners went through to come to the decision for support tool.
Thank you, Rose, and hello, everybody. Welcome and thanks for your interest in our project here. Why Santa Clara County? Well, what's unique about us is we're a county of dichotomy. As most of you probably know, Santa Clara County is the heart of Silicon Valley. It's on the face of it a very prosperous, highly educated community. There are about a little under 2 million residents here in this county. The largest city is San Jose, which comprises slightly more than 1 million of those 2 million residents. The rest of the county is distributed across 14 other cities and a number of populated but unincorporated parts of the county. They're broken up into a little over 630,000 households. The median income here is better than $111,000 a year. Unemployment is very low. It's been at or below 3% for about a year now. And officially, only 7.5% of the population falls below the federal poverty standard. So wealthy, well-educated community center of high tech. What's the problem with getting a count here? Well, here's the other side of the picture. Here's a more in-depth look at the picture of the people who make up Santa Clara County. It's a majority non-white county. Only about 30% of the population here in Santa Clara County are made up of non-Hispanic whites. Folks of Asian descent comprise the largest plurality. They're from many parts of Asia, all the way from the Pacific coast to the Mediterranean coast of Asia, actually. So they span the entire very, very large continent. The two most prominent presences here are folks from Pacific Asia, especially from Southeast Asia and from China, and folks from South Asia, the Indian subcontinent. The Hispanic or Latinx population here is about a quarter of the folks who live here. And in these populations, as well as the Asian population, there's a pretty significant presence of relatively recent immigrants or individuals who are one generation away from the original immigrant population. As a result, better than half the homes here in Santa Clara County have a language other than English as the primary one spoken at home. And a fifth of the county's residents report that they speak English less than very well. Among those, nearly half speak an Asian or Pacific Islander language. Anecdotally, we understand that the two most frequently occurring languages are Vietnamese and Mandarin Chinese. A third very commonly spoken language here in Santa Clara County that's other than English would be one of three principal Indian subcontinent languages, Hindi or Urdu or Punjabi. And there are about 35, 36% of the population who report, well, actually, of the non-English first population here, who report that their first language is Spanish or Spanish Creole. So there are a lot of people in this county of 2 million who speak a language other than English, and many of them speak that non-English language as their primary language. Next slide, please. You'll remember I said that the median income here in Santa Clara County is upwards of $111,000. That's a really deceiving figure because it represents a very large range. As you probably know, we've got lots of very, very high earners here in Santa Clara County. The consequence is that that folks who have incomes that would easily qualify for middle incomes in most of the country frequently fall below what's called the self-sufficiency standard here in Santa Clara County. As a result, about 30% of the households here in Santa Clara County are at or below self-sufficiency income standards, which, just to give you a better frame of reference, works out to about somewhere between $85,000 and $90,000 a year for a household comprised of 2 adults and 2 school-aged children, give or take. In addition to those 30% of households who are at or below self-sufficiency, households who meet the self-sufficiency standard but are one unexpected $500 bill away from economic distress, in other words, from falling into that below self-sufficiency standard, comprise another 10% of households here. So altogether, we've got 40% of the households here in this very wealthy county who are experiencing some form of economic stress. And that stress is most prevalent in immigrant communities from Latin America, from Vietnam, and from the Philippines, and among young people more generally. Those kinds of factors sort of conspire to create a very hard-to-count community, or at least the significant presence of a very hard-to-count community here in Santa Clara County. In fact, the numbers are large enough that the Census Bureau has estimated that it needs somewhere between 2,400 and 3,000, not just office and field staff, but actually of post-census enumerators here in Santa Clara County in order to do the job. Using the Census Bureau's own ratio, that means that they need somewhere between 5 candidates for every one of those hires. That's somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000 applicants. It's a huge number. It's a daunting number for one county to have to deal with. Add to that the high number of non-English speakers or English as a second language speakers, and there's a high need for candidates who can speak a language other than English. The very strong economy, remember we've got an unemployment rate here of somewhere in the neighborhood of 3% or less, means that there are relatively few people who are looking for work, especially who are looking for or temporary work here in Santa Clara County. So the challenge here of trying to find somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000 applicants for the enumerator position just struck local officials and the local community as a really daunting one. The result was that the city and the county got together early on in this process, looked at this picture and said, we need to get a head start on pulling the community together to try and chip away at the very large challenge of making sure that the Bureau has enough enumerators in this county to make as complete a count as possible. So we reached out to other local governments here, to the college system here in Santa Clara County, which is very robust, and to a very rich community of community-based organizations, especially community-based organizations that are working in language-challenged and economically challenged communities here in Santa Clara County, the bulk of which, quite frankly, are in San Jose, to pull folks together to try and figure this problem out. Next slide, please. The folks who came together initially to form this enumerator subcommittee, recruitment subcommittee, took a look at essentially an array of activities to try and up interest in the enumerator recruiting opportunity and to up the number of applications. Obviously, there was going to be a need to get the word out as effectively as possible, as widely as possible, especially in the hard-to-count communities themselves. There was a need to make what is a pretty long and sometimes convoluted application process as simple as possible. And there was, and the committee also felt that there was a need to figure out if there was a way to patch together a variety of incentives that might prompt folks in a very low unemployment rate community to take an interest in these temporary positions. So working with a variety of parties, the committee has looked at trying to put together packages of community college credit for the work experience. We've been reaching out to employers to see if we can, one, map the skill sets that are involved in the enumerated jobs, and then layer them over job opportunities that are out there in the rest of the world. And working with our local workforce boards and community colleges and some of the workforce development private organizations, trying to identify and put in place off-ramps into employment for enumerators that are going to be available to them as they come out of their enumerated jobs towards the end of the census process. Having put all of that together and the pieces together, the challenge then became, okay, so how do we take these disparate elements and try to weave them together so that folks actually are able to see the whole picture? And that's where Community Connect Labs came into the picture. Stephanie.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence, for that context. And thanks, Roz, for having us and giving this opportunity to share this story. Lawrence has not mentioned the significant volume of work that he's had to put in to really mobilize and coordinate across these disparate agencies. These meetings have been going on well into last year. Community Connect Labs became a larger part of the conversation probably around November of 2018. So by then, the Enumerator Recruitment Subcommittee was meeting on a monthly or bi-monthly basis at that point, and there were different groups within that subcommittee to evaluate different aspects of the field staff recruitment challenge. So the part that Community Connect Labs was involved with was in seeing if we could develop some sort of tool or solution that can help mitigate those pain points that Lawrence had just discussed, streamline the efforts, and lower the lift that is required from multiple organizations to be able to help people at least complete the census job application. So in November, December, and January, it was a very slow and intentional process where we were evaluating if we even wanted an opportunity to pilot something. We wanted to make sure that there was buy-in from the organizations, that there was precedence, proof from the actual application that we saw that there was this need. So we got accepted, Community Connect Labs was accepted into the Census Bureau's Accelerator program through an organization called the Opportunity Project, which is affiliated with the Census Bureau. And from there, we got to participate in a 12-week sprint where we were mentored by field operations leadership from DC, who were able to give us some really good feedback and insight into the application process, where, what journey candidates are going to go through and where potential issues might arise. And from there, we took that experience and then brought it down to the community level and spoke with all the different partners that Lawrence had identified to say, okay, if we were to put this application in front of job seekers, in front of staff who are helping these job seekers, in front of government agencies, what are the questions that arise? Where are the potential areas where people might not succeed in completing an application? So what you see here on your screen right now is the actual application portal for census jobs. It is currently live. It was launched last September. And if you go to 2020census.gov/jobs, you'll be able to see descriptions about the field positions. So mostly they are for address listers, which are being recruited right now, and then for enumerators, which will be recruited from September onwards. It's a single application portal for all field positions. So for instance, I actually submitted an application a while back just to see what the experience would be like. And I know that at some point I'll probably get a call to be interviewed for an address lister position. And I'll also get a call at some point to be interviewed for an enumerator position. So I encourage anyone and everyone to go to this site and to explore the information and the resources that the census has presented, and then think through, what the folks that you're working with who might be great candidates for this role. They could benefit from the part-time flexible opportunity, but they maybe have some certain barriers that'll prevent them from completing the application. What can you do to fill those gaps and support them in that process? So what we devised was a user interview series where we spoke with experts from the Census Bureau, we spoke with job seekers who would actually be the ones who need to apply for census jobs, and then we spoke to implementation partners. So these are the organizations that are supporting these job seekers. And our theory around this was that if these organizations already had existing infrastructure for helping people apply to jobs, throwing the census job in there would not be as significant of a lift. And, Lawrence was instrumental in helping connect us with agencies that spanned, job training nonprofits and workforce development agencies, America's Job Centers. And then we also got some help from our friends in Los Angeles where we wanted to make sure that we weren't exploring this opportunity in a vacuum. We wanted to make sure that, yes, we were identifying issues that could be specific and unique to Santa Clara County, but what other issues are more generalizable and universal in the experience. So we interviewed a bunch of folks, and we were really exploring the behaviors, the habits, motivations of people applying for jobs and for the organizations that were supporting applicants. We literally put the application in front of people, had them go through each screen and had them, give us their thoughts of what they wished they knew, what parts were confusing, what parts they still had questions about. And then we talked about how organizations could incorporate this type of outreach into their workflows. And we ended up with a pretty long list of things that we learned from the process. But in a summary, job seekers, their biggest piece of feedback was it's a long application process. It's an online application, and then there's an online assessment that needs to be taken. Afterwards, there's going to be a period of time that passes before the census starts reaching out to interview folks and then onboard qualified candidates, and that includes the background check process. So for people who are most inclined to apply for these roles, we're thinking maybe community college students, people who already have 1 or 2 part-time jobs, they're busy people and they want to know in advance what they need to do to be able to successfully complete the application. Another big learning that we found was that a lot of the questions people asked, well, why does Census want to know that from me? This makes me hesitate to answer unless I know that it's required. So usually in certain job applications, you hover over something and it gives you a little tooltip. The census application did not have that type of information as readily available, so those were questions that we got in our interviews. Warm referrals was a really big thing that came out. So we asked folks, what would compel you to apply for a job? If you saw maybe a billboard, if you saw an ad in the newspaper, maybe your friends told you, maybe your job search coach told you, what would most compel you to do that? And they all said, it needs to be someone I know and trust, who understands what I'm going through and what is good for me and has my best interests at heart. If they tell me to apply for a census job, then I will do that. If I see an ad randomly or a flyer at a job fair, I'm open to it, but maybe not so much. So the use of trusted messengers, going through them to really advocate for these census opportunities was really important. We also got feedback on the experience of applying for census jobs. So this is an online application. It's the first time that the census is recruiting people online. It is not a mobile-friendly application. We really encourage, and in fact, the census actually says people should apply using a computer. And for those from harder-to-count communities who might not have access to a computer, they're going to probably use a library computer or somewhere that's public. And they were, especially being Silicon Valley, they're thinking about privacy, they're thinking about security measures, so that was a concern. And then lastly, we asked them, and this was, because we are a mobile messaging company, we asked them, hey, if you had the option to receive text message reminders to sort of help you along the process, would you be open to that? And there was a resounding yes, where inboxes are exploding at this point. People have their phones on them. People want to be nudged, especially for me, for instance. I applied for a census job last September. I might not hear back for another year about the result of my application. I probably forgot about it. So those were some of the learnings that we had from job seekers. We also learned a lot from staff. So we asked them, what do they want or need to know before they could encourage their job seekers or their clients to apply for census jobs? They really wanted to learn more about the application process and timeline. And frankly, not all the staff have the capacity to learn and become experts and to be able to answer all the questions that are out there. So there was an information gap there. Staff, we put the application in front of them as well, and they said, gosh, it's a long application. And people who do make it through the application, let's assume that all the male candidates knew to be able to have their selective service number ready, for instance, which is an application requirement. Let's say people made it through that. They're going to see the assessment and they're going to say, I'm done with this. So they envision the need for someone to continue to push them to actually complete the application and the assessment, because if you don't complete the assessment, then you are not going to be considered as a candidate. We've asked them about incentives for, allocating staff time and resources to census jobs and recruitment. Ultimately, it's up to the Census Bureau to recruit enough people. But as Lawrence described, it's very much in the best interest of counties and cities and nonprofits to also, drive people who reflect the communities that they're counting and who speak local languages to this. But job training organizations are often having to report, job placements. There are many that would count census jobs as internship placements. So there was some organizational incentives there. And then the last piece of feedback that we got was, if all of this information was just in a short 2 or 3 minute video that was available in English and Spanish, that would be nice. So we were like, we could do something with that. And so we brought these takeaways to Lawrence and the Enumerator Recruitment Subcommittee, and we decided that, yes, it would be a really great idea to try and scope out an actual pilot where we build this tool and then we launch it for address lister recruitment. So the peak address lister recruitment is going to take place around May and June of this year. Address listers are going to be deployed between August and November of this year, 2019. So knowing that, again, it's the same application portal and the same application process, what we learn from here, from making the movements of mobilizing these organizations, getting people to text into this tool, helping support people to complete the application, that will largely inform outreach efforts at scale when it comes to the big enumerator recruitment push. So we scoped out a discrete timeline. The pilot is currently running. And the goal, again, is just to help people complete the online application and assessment process, because we're not going to see interviews happening until a little later this summer, and obviously we won't be able to see through people actually getting jobs. So the committee that Lawrence had helped mobilize, we decided to offer 3 potential roles to these organizations. They could either do marketing, which is a more passive outreach where, we provided flyers, templates, social media blurbs, newsletter blurbs, just market this in the way that you market other job opportunities and see what sticks. Other organizations are trying more active outreach. So maybe it's their job coaches who are sitting down with each of their clients saying, hey, have you thought about a census job? Let me talk to you about that. Or maybe they're doing phone banking, or they're calling all their clients, or doing personalized email outreach. And then the third role that we're experimenting with right now is providing computing resources. So knowing that people need to access computers to submit applications, if we put together a network, a closed network of organizations that can offer computing resources and directing people to those, would we see a higher completion rate for applications? So those are the three roles that we scoped out, and this is a visual representation of the timeline that we're following. So again, all the marketing and outreach, regardless if it's, they're posting on social media or if they're telling their clients, the call to action for them is to invite people to text into this mobile messaging tool, which I'll show you in a second. And the tool will help establish whether someone qualifies to apply for a census job, but then directs them to resources, which includes a combination of online resources like videos, and then also to computer resources if people indicate that they need them. And then as you see, towards the end of May or June, the applications are actually due, and then the census is reaching out to folks. So again, we're just targeting the early part of the recruitment process right now, but we think we're going to be able to learn a significant amount. So going back to our experience working in the Accelerator program and studying the application and getting feedback, we mapped out 5 key steps of the application process and then determined what we would do to make sure that the tool supports candidates through each of the steps. So it includes, getting people to understand what the job is in the first place, understanding what they need in order to apply and to successfully complete the assessment. And so we designed the tool for the purpose of this pilot to tackle those first 2 steps, the pre-application and the application, but our tool at scale will involve those 5 steps throughout the entire life cycle of the enumerator, which goes all the way to connecting people to off-ramp and other opportunities that present themselves from the city. What we've developed, in addition to the tool, are some resources to give staff. So we have a short guide that outlines the census opportunity, timelines, pay rates, job requirements, application process, and how the tool works. We also created in-house from Community Connect Labs some training videos that are 2 to 3 minutes long and in English and Spanish, and these detail all the questions, those frequently asked questions that people gave us during our interview process. We also put together some guidelines on computer resource centers. So anyone who is inviting someone to apply for a census job on their computer, we took some guidelines from the American Library Association and said, hey, make sure you have someone who's going to clear the browser history right beforehand, for instance. We provided a marketing guide with some templates and blurbs so that people can literally copy and paste into their existing marketing channels. And then lastly, once people start texting into the tool, we'll be able to say, this organization has referred X many candidates to apply for a census job, and we can see that based on the number of people who've texted in. And then we could also see, based on self-reported data, how far they made it in the process. And here's what the tool actually looks like. So it's a mobile messaging tool. It takes place over SMS. And the reason why we chose this is because text messaging is pretty much free for most phone plans, and it works for smartphones. It also works for flip phones. So we have this tool available in both English and Spanish. And then, like I mentioned, it helps people determine if they're eligible for to apply for a census job, and then it directs them to resources, all the while giving administrators, which includes the Complete Count Committee, feedback on how people are applying. We asked people for their zip code, for instance, and what languages that they speak other than English. And we could see in this zip code that might be predominantly Vietnamese speaking, we don't have a lot of Vietnamese speaking candidates. So maybe what can an organization do to up their outreach there? To actually get this information out to users to text into it, we provided these flyers. So these are just general templates. We assigned Lawrence's organization, for instance, Work to Future, a word and a phone number where people can text into it. And again, these are in English and Spanish. And then, you can imagine either this is posted online on social media, on Facebook, or someone like a job search coach gives this to them. So I won't spend a lot of time on this screen, but this is just to show you, these are some screenshots of the tool. It's like texting with your friend. It's an anonymous survey, so at no point is anyone giving their name. And then as you could see on the second phone screen in the middle of the slide here, the top question, are you currently a U.S. citizen and 18 years or older? That is the one key requirement that currently exists for census jobs, so we do want to ask people of that, and we've included that requirement in the advertisement so no one's taken off guard. But to take additional precautions, we did phrase that as a compound question so that if someone answers no, we don't know why. So we're taking measures like that to preserve people's anonymity and make them feel safer in texting and interacting with this tool. Then we're sending them videos, we're sending them information via email, and we're asking them throughout the process if they want to receive additional messages. So if they opt into a reminder, they're actually going to get a check-in after a week or so asking, did they complete their application? And if not, how can we help? And if, as necessary, if someone says, I need help with the application and I need in-person assistance or some place to use a computer, we could direct them to our database of all our local assistance centers. So the last thing I'll talk about before I turn it over to Roz is something about data privacy. So there has been some concern around, what happens, one, when someone applies for a census job, but two, also if they're texting into this tool, what happens to the data? Well, first of all, we did give recommendations for partners, like I mentioned. So for instance, if you're filling out the census application online on a public computer, one of the first screens will ask you to put in your social security number, and they use that as your unique identifier. But if you fill it out, it doesn't do that thing where it X's out the number, it just leaves it there. So we made a recommendation to actually physically turn the computer to face a wall to make sure that no one could stand over your shoulder and see that. We made recommendations where computer centers, they let users know, hey, if you're using this public computer, make sure you're not asking the browser to save your passwords, to autocomplete things, make sure you're signing out of everything. So just basic guidelines for anyone. It doesn't even have to be a census job. If you're helping someone apply for any position on a computer, this should be a norm. But we made those recommendations just in case. And then in addition to that, for our platform, anyone who is texting into it and interacting with this tool, again, at no point are we collecting their names. We're using their cell phones as the unique identifier. I showed you how we framed the questions very discreetly. And then lastly, we are only providing the highest level of data to this a very small number of administrators. The rest are going to be receiving reports that we process or their administrator process for them. So I know this is a lot. If you have other questions or want to learn more, you could go to censusoutreach.org. We actually have 5 tools that we've developed for census, and the field staff tool is just one of them. And then that's my email address. But Roz, I'll turn it back over to you for a Q&A. And just checking in here, Roz, we're still seeing my screen, and I think we only hear me so far.
Okay. How does it look now?
Roz, right now we see the transition screen.
Okay.
And now we see your screen. Great.
Okay, great. Thanks for bearing with me. So thank you so much to our speakers, Stephanie and Lawrence, for walking us through the process to kick off their field recruitment pilot. Just a few points to recap before we open it up for questions. And now would be a great time to submit any questions you have into the questions panel. We'll just be collecting them, and then we'll draw from those for a brief Q&A period with the remaining time. But before we get to that, just a few points. So there is a lot at stake for cities with the 2020 census, and cities are right to prepare early and engage their citizens along the way. With all the barriers to being counted, the ace up your sleeve will be engaged community members that can advocate for census participation among their families, coworkers, and neighbors. The Census Bureau will be recruiting for field positions no matter what, but cities can help the Census Bureau and help underemployed community members and help achieve a complete count in their cities by building a pipeline of local candidates for these jobs. After all, enumerators will be the last chance for many households, especially those facing barriers or those who distrust the process, to be counted. And think of what a difference it would make to have a familiar face show up at their door instead of a complete stranger. And whether you're using technology like in San Jose, or you just keep up a coordinated effort among your key partners and do strategic marketing of the opportunities, field recruitment is one of the highest impact engagement strategies for census. And now I'd like to transition to questions with our remaining time. And I see a lot of questions coming in through the questions panel, so please keep those coming. And we will give it maybe 30 seconds or so to build up a list, and then we'll dive right in. One question that I can quickly answer is, will this presentation be available offline? If you registered for the webinar, you will be getting a recording of it. So that will be coming to in your inbox within the next 24 hours, so you can use it to share it with your partners. All right, here's a question. I'm going to ask Stephanie to tackle this one because you might have some knowledge from the Census Accelerator program. The question is about engaging undocumented residents who might have a fear of participating in the census, and putting the workforce development and enumerator recruitment spin on that. Do you know if the Census Bureau is providing any specific training to enumerators on that barrier to being counted, on how to engage undocumented folks as enumerators?
That's a big question. So the training curriculum currently exists. If you go to the Census Bureau's Library of Resources, they have their operational plan for the entire non-response follow-up operation. If you'd like some light reading, you could go through and browse through the 100-some pages of that. But you'll see there that they do have a training curriculum laid out. I do not immediately recall if there is an intentional section that's dedicated to how to speak with cultural competency to different communities like that, but I imagine it would be a part of the training given the efforts that the census is putting for cultural competency. But this is where I would personally recommend that, it's the cities, it's trusted messenger organizations on the ground that are also priming the groups in advance, saying, hey, it's important to participate in the census. By the way, if you don't, you might have someone knocking on your door who's going to be asking you those questions. So, making sure that even if there isn't any training available, that at least someone on the ground from a trusted messenger organization has reached these hard to count folks first. I will also mention that currently, right now, while census jobs are only available to U.S. citizens, back in 2010, the census did issue waivers for people who spoke certain languages that were hard to recruit for, and they had people who had green cards hired for that. So we could imagine in the future, especially after the completion of the citizenship question test that they're doing over the summer, if they anticipate needing a higher number of enumerators potentially, or people of a certain population or who speak a certain language, we might see those waivers coming out again, in which case you might, if these are folks who are already interfacing with these trusted messenger organizations, you could imagine there are other things these organizations could do to train those people in advance of going to knock on doors.
Thanks, Stephanie. And the next question is for Lawrence. Lawrence, you mentioned that a part of the discussion of the Complete Count Subcommittee for Enumerator Recruitment was on creating incentives for census jobs as well as off-ramps into other employment opportunities. And I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit on what some of those off-ramps or incentives are.
Yeah, there are really two primary ones that the committee has identified so far. And one is providing college credit for the work experience that an enumerator would gain from the job. This effort is happening both at the local level as well as at the state level. The effort is not complete yet, so nothing's nailed down at this point. But within the community, we have, within the county, we have actually 7 community colleges, for example, within Santa Clara County, and several of them, two in particular, are looking at the question of whether they can assign either work experience credit or academic credit for the work experience gained by enumerators. The indications at the local level is that that there's interest in doing that, there's a willingness to do that, but the particulars of working that out are still in development. That conversation is also happening at the state chancellor's office. So there's also an effort that would apply essentially throughout California to do something similar. And if that comes off, then that'll take the onus off the local community colleges to address that particular incentive. The other incentive is this thing that we've called off-ramps to employment. There are 2 primary subcommittee participating sets of organizations that are looking at this question. One is the largest of the local chambers of commerce. Again, they're supportive of the idea in principle. They agreed to reach out to their members and poll them and see if they could drive member interest in making those kinds of opportunities available. As part of that process, one of the things that the subcommittee did was essentially to take a closer look at the skill sets that were involved in being an effective enumerator, and then mapping those onto employment opportunities, onto jobs, if you will, onto job skills, to try and put a frame around the types of jobs that the skill sets derived from being an effective enumerator might best apply to. If you've looked at those skill sets, you'll not be surprised to hear that to a large extent they fall into the soft skills area. Good customer service, the ability to communicate effectively, those kinds of things. Well, it turns out that in this employment environment, even here in Silicon Valley, as interested and invested as employers are in hard technical skills, they place a very high premium on soft skills. So just generally speaking, those soft skills that are gained as an enumerator will collectively serve as an asset for the individual who's looking for more permanent employment coming out of the enumerator experience. So having gone through that process, we provided that information then to the Chamber of Commerce. We also provided that information to our career advising colleagues in the workforce board system, both in Work to Future and our sister workforce board here in the county, an organization called NOVA. And what they'll be doing is over time feeding that information out to their front-end career advising staff so that they can build a communications package together to also use in their interactions with employers in the normal course of work to, again, try to build an inventory, if you will, of employers who have expressed more than a willingness and interest, we hope, in speaking with and taking a look at the resumes of enumerators as they're preparing to come off the job. And the idea here in an ideal world is we build a seamless series of connections for the enumerators, so that they experience as little unemployment or between job time as possible from their coming out of their enumerator stint.
And if I could briefly add to that, so one of the parts of the tools that we won't be able to test in the pilot, but we're hoping to develop out is, none of these benefits, these opportunities, they're not going to just appear on their own for enumerator candidates. They have to go and actively seek and find them. So if we already have communication with these candidates and have helped them through the application process, once we know enumeration is completed, we could reach out and say, hey, all right, let's talk about off-ramps. What can we connect you with? So it's driving, again, the resources to the people, meeting them where they are.
Thank you both so much. I have another question here, and I want to frame it in the context of preparing other cities that want to take on a similar effort and be really involved in the workforce development aspect of the field staff recruitment. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to address this question first. And the question is how, because you've worked with a few cities now on these efforts, how would you prepare cities for what they can expect from the relationship with their regional Census Bureau office? I know it's probably a difficult question because these census offices are under-resourced and probably varies from place to place. But in terms of managing that relationship, or what kind of communication have you been seeing in the stronger partnerships between the city or complete count committees and the regional representatives from the Census Bureau?
That's a great question. So as you know, the country is divided into key regions. So for instance, Santa Clara County, since we're in California, we're in the West Coast region, and our regional office is in Los Angeles. Now that's with the Census Bureau. To layer on top of that, you're going to have some combination of a state complete count committee and then your county complete count committee, and sometimes there are regional complete count efforts. This is hyper local and depends on every unique region. So one of the first things I would encourage you all in your cities to do is get the lay of the land. Where is your regional census office? Where are their local area census offices, since those have been opening up as well? Who are your identified partnership specialists? And they will be the ones who are working closely with your local complete count committees, and they'll be able to tell you about recruitment needs and what recruitment specialists might be doing. And then also encourage you to then look at your state complete count committee and your county complete count committee, and do all of that to understand the lay of the land. Each region is going to be different. In Santa Clara County, there's been a shortage of recruitment specialists, so they've asked partnership specialists, for instance, to step in with that. In Central Valley, California, some of the cities and counties have kind of come together and created a regional complete count effort. So that would be my advice, again, to say it one more time, is to get the lay of the land and make sure you're taking into account the Census Bureau's resources, which include the regional office and the area census offices and the local partnership specialists, and then coordinating also with your state or your county or your regional complete count committees. Santa Clara County is this beautiful combination where everyone's at the table. It's just worked out that way.
Great, thank you so much. So we are just about out of time. If there are any questions that we didn't get to, I will do my best to answer those offline by email or just put you in touch with our speakers. But before you leave today, we just want to say we hope you stay in touch with Cities of Service. If you'd like to learn more about the service that we provide to our coalition cities, or if you're interested in joining our growing coalition, please feel free to reach out to my amazing colleague, Jessica, at the email on the screen. If you are a city that wishes to learn more about our census working group that convenes every other month by conference call, you can email me. And in addition, you can stay up to date on resources and our work through our Cities of Service newsletter and all of our social media platforms. And so, a great big thank you once again to Lawrence and Stephanie, our speakers, and to our audience for your great questions. That just about covers it for this Cities of Service webinar, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.